Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to a special 5-part podcast series I recently did with John Gill, the Vice President of Education at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, the ACFE. In this 5-part series, we take a look at 5 different fraudsters, looking at the frauds they engaged in, how they were able to do so, and what led them to getting caught. We use this as an exploration for the compliance practitioner and the fraud examiner to detect and prevent fraud in their organizations. We take a look at Nathan Mueller and the fraud triangle, Mark Whitaker, tone at the top, Andrea Baxendale, unfair treatment can increase risk, James Brandolino, doing your due diligence, and James Gromazek, what is an insider trading crime? It's a fascinating exploration of fraudsters and, more importantly, the lessons that you can learn from them. John Gill has a wide and lengthy history with the ACFE and in education. I know you will find this special series worthwhile. This special 5-part podcast series on fraudsters is a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. It's here for our first episode with John Gill, the Vice President of Education at the ACFE. We are today going to take up the case of Mr. Nathan Mueller and the fraud triangle. So, John, first of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Well, Tom, thank you for having me. Yes, I've been with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners since 1995. And so one of the things that the founder, Joseph Wells, was doing before I even got here then was part of our training programs. We did a lot of video workbook programs. And so he always included a fraudster in the program. And that was always my favorite part of it. And I liked watching and hearing from the horse's mouth, because Joe's theory was always, look, these are the people that you're trying to catch. And if you don't understand what their motivations were and what they were thinking, it's not going to work. I mean, you can have all the controls in the world, and as I introduce you to some of the people of fraudsters I've met, you can see if they're clever enough, they can always figure a way around the controls. And so you really have to understand the human being. And so he did those for years, and then, probably about 10, 12 years ago, I took that role over, and that's one of my favorite things that I do. And the way we get these people, sometimes I see a story about them, and I've written to them in prison. Sometimes CFE will do a case and will let us know about it, and so then I'll contact them that way. But I've been always surprised that people are willing to sit down and talk to me, but I learn something from everyone. And so that's what I want to share with you in these podcasts, some of my favorite fraudsters and what I learned from them. So one of my favorites I've ever interviewed is a guy named Nathan Mueller. So Nathan is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he worked as an accountant for a division of ING, the insurance and banking institution. So Nathan was kind of an all-American guy. He, played football in high school, married his high school sweetheart. He went to college and got a degree in accounting and had a very good job with ING. Well, his wife tells him one day, Nathan, we're going to have a baby. And this is their first child, and Nathan said he just began to freak out. He was living in this small house, and they didn't have room for a baby, and he starts thinking about, well, what are we going to do? We have to have more money. And then the light bulb goes off, and he goes, hey, when ING acquired the company that he originally worked for, he was going through the documentation, and he saw that he had $250,000 check approval authority. And he thought, that's strange. I never had that before. Somebody must have made a mistake, because I never had the ability just on my own signature to approve $250,000 worth of payments. This had happened 2 years earlier, but at the time, he didn't really need the money. Now, 2 years later, when he's having his first baby, he starts thinking, hey, I could ease up this, financial burden by writing checks to myself. And so that's what he started doing. He set up set up a company under his name, put himself in there as a vendor, and just approved checks going to this company. But he really is a nice guy. I've talked to him, he's spoken at some of our events, and people have met him. He's very likable, he's a very nice guy, and so he had to believe that I'm not a bad person. A person who just outright steals, that's a crook, that's somebody that deserves to go to prison, but I'm not that person. I'm a nice guy. What I'm doing is okay because, and then he had a whole list of reasons. One of which was the simple fact that ING is a multi-billion-dollar company, and in his role as in the accounting department of this particular division, he said on a daily basis I would wire transfer $8, $9, $10 million. And some of the transfers were $6 or $7 million just in and of themselves. So he said, the first check I wrote was about $11,000, and he thought, this is not a big deal for ING. They can afford it. It's nothing to them. So that helped him go down that road. And then he also said the problem with being an accountant is he knew how much other people made in his department. And so he's like, well, I work harder than this person. I have more experience than this person. I've been here longer than this person, and they make more than I do, so that it's okay. So first check was for $11,000. 3.5 years later, fast forward, and the total was about $8.5 million. So it went from 11,000 to 8.5 million pretty quickly. So when I interviewed Nathan, I thought, boy, he really fits the fraud triangle. And so if you're not familiar with the ACFE literature, one of our core principles that we teach is what we have dubbed the fraud triangle. This came from research that Dr. Donald Cressy did back in the 1950s. He's one of the first people to really study people who steal from their employer. He called them trust violators or embezzlers. And so he went around to prisons all over the United States and interviewed people that had stolen from their employers. And he said, in a lot of these cases, I see the same three things over and over and over. And he called the first thing that he noticed was the people had some kind of a financial need. And he called it an unshareable financial need. And we've summed that up as just pressure. That the thought of stealing comes because the person needs money, which is logical when you stop and think about it. None of the people that that I've interviewed in the last 15 years were predators, meaning that they got out of college and they looked around in the job ads and they decided, okay, this is the company that I'm going to target. And I'm going to work there for, 3 or 4 years and work my way up, and then I'm going to strike. All of these people, none of them I've interviewed have ever taken the job with that in mind. They simply took the job, they're working away, and then all of a sudden, hey, I need money and I need it desperately. The second thing that Cressy noticed was, they had an opportunity to relieve the pressure by stealing. So he called that perceived opportunity. So these people needed money, but they were in a position where, I could steal. I can relieve the pressure by stealing the money. And then the third leg is, he said, again, these people are not career criminals. They don't take the jobs with the thought that, hey, I'm going to steal. And he said, so they have to rationalize their actions. So that's the third leg of the triangle is rationalization. I'm not a bad person. It's okay because. And so when I was interviewing Nathan, I couldn't help but hear the story. And immediately the first thing that I'm visualizing in my head is the fraud triangle. Because he'd worked for ING about 3 or 4 years. And so it wasn't until his wife said, hey, we we're going to have a baby, and he starts thinking, I've got to get paid down these student loans. I need to pay off my credit cards. I need to pay off this home equity loan. We need to buy a bigger house. And he just becomes consumed with that. And then he thinks, hey, I can write 200 checks for $250,000, even though he's had that ability for 2 years. But it wasn't until he needed the money that popped in his head. Hey, and then all of a sudden now ING is, instead of just being an employer, is now this big cash cow. Oh, they can afford it. They've got tons of money. They'll never miss it. Plus, gosh, I'm such a good employee, and all these other people are making more money than I deserve it. So and it doesn't explain every case. Sometimes there are people who are just predators, or they're just mean, or they're psychopathic or sociopathic. But for a great many people that I've interviewed, it follows that pattern exactly. They need the money. They've got a financial pressure. They can relieve it by stealing. They've got the opportunity to do that, but then they've got to convince themselves, hey, I'm not a bad person. So I thought it was a very, very interesting case, and also how it can get out of hand pretty quickly, going from $11,000 to a total of $8.5 million in just a few years.
Well, John, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but this has really been a fascinating exploration of how fraud can not only be perpetrated against any company, but can really be engaged in by any employee, even an everyman like Nathan Mueller. So I look forward to tomorrow's episode where we take up Mark Whitaker. So with that, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this 5-part exploration of fraudsters and the lessons learned for the compliance professional and the fraud examiner. If you'd like more information on the ACFE, check out their website, www.acfe.org. It's a great organization. You can certainly get a lot out of it. They're most helpful for the fraud examiner, for the compliance professional, or for the business professional. This 5-part series on fraudsters with John Gill has been a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.